All right, everyone. So this is a short tutorial just explaining the fundamentals of Max 8 to get you started on your first homework assignment, and also just to refamiliarize with all the things that we talked about in class on Thursday last week. Hopefully this is a good just introduction again to this program, and the nice thing about having the video is you can step through it and slow it down and watch things again. So first of all, once again, Max is available for you to download and use for free for 30 days. Just remember that you might want to strategically place this so you have the full till the end of the semester, right? So you might wait until April 5th or April 10th or something to download and use it. All you need to use is your email password, or you give them your email, and that's how you get the download. So it's a great way of being able to use this on your home computer for doing the assignments if you'd like. So let's get started though. So Max is down here in the dock. It's also in the dock on the MIDI Lab computers, but it's important to remember that there's also the MC Granulator, which looks just like this icon. But you can see this one says Max above it, and the other one will say MC Granulator. So make sure you're using Max itself. And notice that on a Mac, again, I have Max open. You can see Max here, but if I want to make a new, what's called a patcher, I'm going to hit Command N or type in new patcher or go to the new patcher. And that's going to pull up this window. And this is the main Max window for all the creation, all the things that we're going to do in this program. So first off, remember that there are Max is built off of this infrastructure of objects. They're called objects specifically, and I'll just make a comment. Objects are things, are things inside the program that do something. They are operations, all right? So there's all kinds of different objects, and as I mentioned, one of them is random. Okay, let's talk about some other objects. There's the cycle tilde object, which we talked about last week, which is, again, generates a random cycle or sine wave. Another one is the select object, okay? You'll also notice that if I start typing in something randomly that doesn't, the program is going to try and fill this. So if I, for instance, go to exponential, you can see that it's making a list of things that have the two letters EX next to them, and you can look through this list at all these different objects that have E and X in them. Or for example, if I type in saw, it's going to automatically select the saw tilde because it's at the top. And then there's also a multi-channel saw, but those are a new object that also is another sound generator that creates saw waves. So, and one thing to notice too, that if I type in N to make a new object, which is the quick key N, if I type in something that is not an object, like, elephant, it shows this red box, which basically says there is no such object called elephant in the program, therefore it doesn't work, okay? But there are over 200 different of these objects in Max. And as we talked about with Max, every object has an inlet, and the inlets are on top, and the outlets are on the bottom, okay? Now some objects have lots of outlets, like the transport object. You can see it has many outlets and two inlets. And each of these outlets gives me a different thing relating to whatever the music is or what I'm doing with it. So remember that inlets are expecting data to come into them. So they receive data, and they are always on the top. Outlets are on the bottom, and they always send data away or out. So data comes in through the top, and then the object calculates something or does something and then outputs from the bottom. All right. Now there are cables in this project program too, right? These cables, and all I'm doing is holding down the mouse click button, and the cables connect to other objects, and that's how we send data to other things. So, as I mentioned, there are all kinds of objects, and there are lots of objects that have quick keys, okay? So, some of the most common objects we use, for instance, is the toggle. And if I just hit T, it makes a toggle. And the toggle key is a great object that sends a 1 or a 0. So this is a really common thing to use if an object does something. So for instance, the metronome is a metronome, and the toggle turns it on and off. Okay, and there are other various objects that do something similar. There are also two types of numbers, number boxes, right? So we have the integer box, and I get that by hitting I. And there's the float box that I get by hitting F. And again, as we talked about in class, a float number is a number with a decimal, and an integer box or an integer number is a number that is a whole number without decimals. And this is really important. So keep these things in mind. You know, it is important whether a number is posting as a decimal or not. All right, so some other things to know, or some other important boxes or quick keys is the B, which is the bang. And the bang object is literally just a button that tells something to do something else, okay? Now, a really good example of this is the random. So if I type in random 500, when I send that random, when I want to get a random number, I bang it. I send a single bang to it. And yes, I'm saying the word bang, which probably seems odd, but that's what it's called. And it's generating that random number. All right? So a couple of other things. So these are just quick key commands. Now, I want to mention again one of the most important things about this, locking and unlocking the screen, right? So when the screen is locked, I'm able to interact with the objects, like click this bang and move this number up and down, or click on this box and type in 500. And that's because the screen is locked. And the lock is down here at the bottom left. You can see me hovering over it down here at the very bottom. When it's unlocked, I can move the objects around or make new objects. But notice I can't push the bang button anymore. It's because it's unlocked. It's in edit mode, basically, right? That means I can resize my bang. I can put it over here, whatever, make more. But I can't interact with it until it's locked. And the lock, again, is down here at the bottom left. And a really good key command to remember is Command E, okay? Command E is going to lock and unlock the screen. And when you're working on something, you're command locking and unlocking constantly as you work on something. You add an object, you try to make it work, you take it away, you're constantly interacting both in locked and unlocked mode. So you're going to want to be able to do that quickly. You really want to learn Command E because you can't, if you're constantly going over here to click on this, it's just wasting a lot of time, okay? Great. Okay, so a couple of other things to know. Max is a really powerful program because we're basically creating small systems that work together, okay? So let's start by making a small thing that does something interesting. Oh, let me mention one more thing first, too. There are really two types of objects in Max as well, all right? We have the audio objects, okay? And then separate to those, we have the Max objects, all right? And the most important things to remember about these is that the audio objects deal with audio signal, all right? And what's really important to remember about these is that they always have, excuse me, they always have a tilde, a tilde associated with them, all right? So that tilde is going to tell me that an object is an audio object, this little audio tilde. A max object is just a number, okay? So a max objects deal with data. So a good example, of course, is my random number over here. These are not audio signals. All they are is a random number between 0 and 499. It's not an audio signal, okay? But a perfect example of an audio signal is to, again, hit N for new and then type in cycle tilde. Now the cycle tilde object generates a sine wave, and a sine wave is an audio signal, all right? So if I want to hear this audio signal, I have to do two things. So first of all, I have to make sure the audio is outputting correctly. As you know from Logic and all the other programs you use for audio, it has its own inputs and outputs, right? And I can turn on, check the inputs and outputs up here under Options, Audio Status, all right? So again, under Options, Audio Status, I click on this. It's going to pull up the Max CPU window, and this tells me, or sorry, the CPU, the audio ins and outs and all the audio driver stuff. Sorry, you're hearing little bells. It's my little kitty here. So right now the output is the Max speakers and the input is the Max microphone, which is fine, all right? Now, if I want to turn on the audio driver in Max, the easiest way is way down here in the right corner. It says audio on and off. I have to turn the audio on, so it's a little blue box. You can see that down there in the very corner, all right? And now the audio driver is on. Great. So let's talk about another way of getting objects. So we have our cycle object here, which is generating a signal of 500 hertz of a sine wave, but we don't hear anything, correct? Because it has to output to something. So there are also these little panels up here, or these little pull-down menus, to allow me access to lots of objects. And what I'm going to do is go over here to the sliders and pick the gain slider, which is right there. Notice that it's called gain tilde because it's related to audio signal. And if I click on this and drag it out here, it's going to give me a gain slider, which is a volume controller. It's a solo channel, a single channel audio controller. So it's not stereo, it's only one channel. And what I'm going to do is connect this to the volume controller, okay? Now we never want to send this signal straight to the microphone or the headphone, or sorry, not the headphones, the speakers, because it has no volume control, which would be really bad. So I automatically want to have some sort of, stopgap of a volume controller before I send the signal out, all right? Now, another thing I want you to notice is that the cable is different, right? This cable looks different than the cables, for instance, from the input. The input cable is gray, and the output cable for cycle tilde is this dotted yellow line. And the reason for that is that a dotted yellow line like this always indicates an audio signal. So because the cycle tilde is outputting an audio signal, the cable becomes this dotted line to tell you that it's sending an audio signal, all right? So we're passing the audio signal into our volume controller. The next thing we need to finally hear this is what's called the Easy DAC, okay? Or the Easy DAC, which is the digital audio converter. So I'm gonna hit N for new and type in Easy DAC, all right? Which gives me this little icon, which is a stereo output to whatever the output is in Max. And right now that's set to my computer speakers. So I'm going to line this up over here. Now I'm going to run this through both the left and the right side from one channel. So notice this has come out of here mono. It's gone in here to mono. And now I'm splitting it to stereo, even though it's really the same signal. And so for the first time now, because several things, the audio output is set up here to my audio, to my headphone, or to the speakers, and the audio driver is on. See the blue dot here, the blue thing here can also be toggled right here. This is going to turn on the audio driver. All right? So now when I turn this up, we should hear it. And we do. So we hear a cycle, a frequency of 500 milliseconds or 500 hertz. Okay? So those are the fundamentals of Max in terms of making this do things. I had sent you the mute button, which was really essential to this assignment. And let me just go find that again. Let me go to downloads. Here is the mute button. So I double click the mute button. I'm going to first unlock this, Command E, and then I'm going to select all of this, Command C to copy it, and then I'm going to click over here. Now watch, if I hit Command V to paste, I get nothing. And the reason is that it's locked, right? The lock is mechanized now. I have to unlock it, then hit Command V to paste. And so now I have my mute button, which is super useful, okay? So the mute button, you can see there's labels here. It's a stereo mute button. And very quickly here, we're going to want to have stereo signals anyways. So the input for the left channel is here. The input for the right channel is here. And then the output for the left is here. The output for the right is here, okay? So, and quickly I'm going to tell you that I never want to see a single assignment without the mute button implemented, okay? So I'm going to basically, this is going to be my stopgap, right? The volume comes out of the gain slider and first passes through the mute button so that I can instantly mute this if I need to. And then I have to pass the left channel to the left speaker and the right channel to the right speaker. All right? And now I should hear this when it's unmuted. Okay? And this little bit of code here tells me the M key, M as in mother, is the mute button. So I can turn this on and off really quickly with M, which is really useful. Okay? Great. Okay, so a couple other things that I want to talk about before we get too much further. We had done all kinds of stuff in class, kind of creating something for the first time. I want to talk about a few other important objects. So there's something also in Max called a message box, all right? And a message box is created by hitting, and it can be a problem because the message box is the M key, all right? Now notice as soon as I hit M, it also unmuted this, right? So here is a message box, and you can see that it's different than these object boxes, right? Like the select object looks like this, has gray edges with inlets and outlets, but it's different than this. But I can type in here select, okay? And I can even write 109 on here. So students make this mistake all the time. You just have to realize that this select object, this is a message box called select 109. It's basically trying to send the message of 109 or select 109, which actually means nothing, to an object, okay? So we can do stuff like the way that these are useful, for example, is that I could create a bunch of different frequencies that go into the cycle object, all right? So if I take the 500 out, the cycle object is empty. It has no frequency, and it needs an argument to know what frequency to play. Right now, it doesn't have any. But I could create several message boxes. One of them that's called, I don't know, 100. One that's called, or that's 200. And one that's 400. Okay? Or whatever. And then these message boxes could attach to the cycle object. And they're all going into the frequency inlet. All right? And then from here, I can actually play different frequencies. So if I turn the mute off, why is it? Oh, it's making no sound because I have no frequency in there, right? So as soon as I hit this 100, and again, I had to lock it, can't hit this without it locked, 100. So now the frequency of 100 is playing. Okay? So that's the difference between a message box and an object box, all right? And it's really important to notice the difference between these things, because if you accidentally make a message box that says key, okay, K, like that, and you accidentally put that here instead, this is not going to work, right? Because this is not an object, it's a message box. So what I need is this object that's called key, which recognizes the keyboard that I'm playing, the keys that I'm playing on the keyboard, all right? So anyway, so those are a lot of the fundamentals. And again, how I access the message box is actually hit M, which I understand is problematic because of my mute button, all right? Now, we could just rename this mute button, actually. If you wanted to, you could make the mute button Shift M, and I can do that really easily by doing this. Watch this. I'm going to take another key object, and I'm just going to pass it to an integer box. Now I'm going to get an integer box by hitting I, and I connect that here. And now watch, if I lock this and hit Shift M, I can see that the key for Shift M is 77, all right? So if I wanted to make my mute button Shift M, I could just change this number to a 77, and now I've stopped that problem, okay? So if I delete this, I can now create a message box by hitting M, and muting is Shift M, okay? Which is actually a pretty good setup, because now I can create message boxes freely and not have to worry about it, okay? Great. Okay, so those are the fundamentals of this program, all right? And, just keep in mind that there's a lot in here. There's a lot you can learn about this program. Now, one last thing I want to talk about in this video is about how we can check the data about an object, which is really useful. So any object, for instance, cycle here, if I want to know what the cycle object does, I can right-click on it and say open the help, all right? And this is going to open a separate box that tells me what the cycle tilde does, and it gives me examples about it, which is super useful, incredibly useful for learning how this program works and learning how these objects work, okay? So for instance, if I want to learn what the counter does, which is a really awesome object that I use all the time, I can make counter, right-click on it, say open counter help, and it's going to pull up this whole box that explains how counter works, along with some examples and some other details about how it can be manipulated and used, and it's really useful, okay? Now another thing that it does is it tells you over here what the arguments are for that object, okay? So the arguments are the different messages that can go in here, in addition to whether or not you actually have to have some numbers in there, all right? So this is a really excellent object to talk about, actually, because it does some specific things that are really useful to know about. So for instance, if I want, you can imagine what counter does. it counts. I know it's shocking, but it does count. So if I connect a bang to it, and then I connect an integer box with the I key, if I just bang this, you can see it's going to count from 0 and just go forever. All right. Now there's no limit to this. It will just go till the end of time. All right. But if I put in some arguments of minimum and maximum, I can change this. So if I type in counter space 1 space 12, it's now going to count from 0 to from 1 to 12 and then start over again. All right? So it's just a super useful object for doing all kinds of things that we'll start on this weekend. But counter is a perfect example of an object that needs an argument, needs arguments of how far do you want me to count. If you only have one number in here, then it's going to assume that that one number is how far you want to count. But what's kind of annoying, it's going to go from 0 to 12, which is 13 numbers. So I often make it a 1 to 12. Then it gives me 12 numbers from 1 to 12. Anyways, so that is an example of an object. All right. Now, what these inlets do is allow me to change the numbers in here. Okay. So for instance, this first inlet, oh wait, is it the first one? Yeah, so here's the maximum number, right? And then I think the minimum was somewhere. Maybe not. Maybe there's only a maximum. But anyways, it allows me to change the things in here, which is super useful. Okay. So, so that is a good introduction to this program. It gives you the basics about how it works and the infrastructure of using it. I really recommend you kind of thumb through these things. Another really useful thing would be to go over to Google and type in the most common used objects max 8. Let's see if this gets anything. Well, I mean, maybe not necessarily. Commonly used. Well, let me go back to that. Here's an object thesaurus, which gives me a list of all the objects in Max, right? It's a massive list, of course, because there are lots. And there are so many different things you can do with this program. Here are a bunch of audio objects related to audio processing. Anyways, it just goes on and on. So, there's all kinds of things you can use. Obviously, we use the same things a lot. I use probably, out of the 200, I would say 80% of what 80% of the objects I use in all my coding are probably about 30 different objects. That's it. There are lots of things too I don't even know. About. I've never used them. Spell, I've never heard of that. I guess it converts to ASCII code. I've never used it, never seen it. It's just a huge program. There's so many different things going on. But this might give you a nice list of things to look at if you were interested. One thing that I really like to do is this, random. If I type in random, for instance, and then I look at the random help file, if I go to this little question mark here, right here, it's going to also tell me other objects that do something very similar, which is really cool. So for instance, drunk is a really cool object that's like random, but what it does is it only randomizes within a range of the previous number. So it allows me to, because random is cool, but sometimes random can go from 0 to 10,000 in one jump. And wouldn't it be great to be able to say, I want a random number from 0 to 10,000, but only 50 away from the previous number, right? Either above or below, which is actually really useful for not getting big, huge jumps in data and getting slow evolution of data of randomization, which is great. Anyways, so this should get you started though on making objects and making things in Max. And in class, we'll really get going on your first assignment and get everyone making sound in this program.